right, good morning or good evening to those of you who are joining us and those of you who would be watching these recorded lectures of our MOOC course or massive online open courses on exploration, mining, and extraction of critical raw materials. And before we kick with our first lecture given by Pasi, Eilu, I would like to give you a little bit of introduction how this works. So the course is organized through the Smart Exploration Research Center, and funding was provided by Professionals, Learning for Professionals, or L4P, and we're happy to run it. So just to get going, so we have 330 people registered for this MOOC course on critical raw materials, and we're building the courses, the lectures as we go on. There are already six lectures already piled up, and this will be filled up to 15 lectures. And you should all know how to get access to the Zoom links. If you go through Studium and then modules presentation, you can find the list of lectures and when they are scheduled. So in terms of intended learning outcomes, so with this MOOC course, we're hoping that you would be learning why materials are called, or certain minerals are called critical or strategic, and what role they have in the society and today in the geopolitics. You learn about exploration mining methods, mineral processing and beneficiation methods, and we will be also covering secondary resources, including mine tailings and aspects relevant for environmental issues and life cycle analysis. At the end of this course, through a small assessment, you would be also receiving a certificate from jointly signed by Uppsala University and the center. So with that, I want to stop my presentation. This would be available, and invite Pasi, Eilu, who was formerly at GTK and now he runs his own consultancy. So he will be giving us the first lecture. Pasi, this is now, stage is yours now.
Okay, thank you. In principle, I've got plenty to say, so it's been again, an interesting exercise to try to squeeze what I think, at least some of the most important things in this topic. And really what I'm going to say, there is also lots of politics and personal opinion, so not everything's really facts. So take care. This is what you think is up to you, not up to me. So I'm going through current state of affairs a lot. What's going on? What are the definitions for criticality, strategic raw material things, and so on? Who is producing what? And then a little bit of foresight and geopolitics as well, and all through how all this relates to raw materials, mineral raw materials, that is, excluding uranium and oil and that sort of things. So probably you all know mineral commodity demand just keeps increasing, but why is this? Is just not because we want more of things, but also increasing range and complexity of modern tech. And then there are all these emerging technologies. We think that we know that need raw materials, but what they will need in the future is, of course, a matter of foresight. We should mitigate the climate change. We have to recycle. Also, these mean and demand on raw materials. Also, recycling means. And then there is technology, financing, social issues, all through aerospace, defense, industries. Global population is increasing. Simply, people need That means more food must be produced, and more food production agriculture needs mineral raw materials as well. And the same thing with the general global standard of living increasing in developing countries. Right. Recycling, there's plenty of work done on this. How much recycling can cover and how things look like in foresight ways is that recycling can cover the demand gap only a little. And then there is another issue that not enough new mines seem to come in production in the time scale what is needed. And then there is this thing happening, not just in Ukraine, but all around Russia. In Africa, we've got Congo, a big country which has been in a civil war more or less since late 1950s. Big cobalt and tantalum producer, and we know that there's plenty of material going illegally across borders, especially to the east. China-US competition, Europe trying to get what it can. Protectionism is growing. There's one thing the political scientists do talk every now and now again about siloed world. I'm not going in any details of that. Just keep in mind. Just this energy transition mitigating climate change means more things than you might think of. Also that one. And in there, we can already see how quickly dependencies can turn into vulnerabilities. Just think of rewards and so. The markets become more fragmented. This is about this siloed world and protectionism in part. And what we see there. And the thing it's important to understand, keep in mind is that dependencies can turn into vulnerabilities. In globalized trade networks, this is something that is an issue for almost everything, although it doesn't look like that necessarily, but it is there in the background all the time. I think so. So, the latest thing the European Union did is creating this Critical Raw Materials Act. It came into force a year and a half ago. It essentially relates to digital transition, green energy transition, the industrial strategy of the European Union, and its security agenda. And the point 4 is probably something that has not been there before, but for obvious reasons, it is now there. Well, this is something that also holds for any developed economy. For China, Russia, India, the item 4 is probably the most important and also includes the internal security of the country. Something we necessarily here in Europe don't think so much about. But keep in mind, it is there. All this is nothing new, really. It's a few years ago I came across this U.S. government paper on report on strategic metals, which was written 100 years ago, or a bit more so, during the First World War. We can be pretty sure that in Japan and Germany, similar thinking was there within the government, or maybe probably before the First World War, and certainly been there since 1930s. So this is nothing new. And in there, just two picks from about 15 years ago, US government, reliability of supplies, US import dependence, European Commission 15 years ago, supply risk issues. It's just that it's more in at the desk and common general talk now that's been maybe for previous decades, especially in 1990s, there was not much about this in public, at least. So what is a critical raw material? It is a raw material which is important for the economy of the country or something similar like European Union, and for which there is a major supply risk. Now, European Parliament has suggested that there maybe should be a third criterion, that a raw material with a global scarcity and energy intensity in the production of that raw material. Not sure if this really went into the final legal papers of the Union. Should check. Probably most of you have seen this plot before quite a number of times. So this is what has come out from the latest criticality assessment for the European Union for the raw materials that were assessed, about almost 80 metals and minerals, and also non-minerals are there. Don't worry too much about what's here in bold or colored. This is for what there is in Finland. Then the other essential definition now, first defined for the European Union only 2 years ago, is what is strategic raw material. For the European Union, that is, it is a critical raw material which is essential for defense or aerospace, or for the green energy transition, or for the digital transition. And a raw material which is very difficult to substitute without significant loss of performance, may be very difficult to increase global production, and yet to forecast it, global demand is growing fast. So what's this? What's there in behind? And what are these? What's there in behind? Here and with a few other plots, I refer to International Energy Association 2025 assessment. The exact reference is with this presentation at the end, so you can check the thing. This is EIA has produced recently and now annually really interesting mineral politics reports. Easy reading, long reports, yeah, more than 300 pages, but very well set up, so you can scroll through and check what's in there and find things quickly that are of your interest. Right. So, like plots like this, selected metals and where they are, in this case, difficult or easy to substitute with something else. Or a plot like this. Important, critical, or strategic raw materials which are mostly produced, or how much of them are just produced as byproducts, and which of them are currently under export restrictions from their producing countries. Really useful stuff for any presentation. So, European Union, these are the lists, latest lists. Next year, we will expect an update for these critical raw materials and what are the strategic raw materials. In there, What's essential for batteries, electric motors are these, and what's essential for solar panel systems are these what I've surrounded by blue. Yeah. Next update should be next year. Interesting to see what's there then. The CRM list has been updated every 3 years since 2008, and every time there have been more items in this list. So let's see what's happening next. So mining, yes, China is a big player in there, but there are plenty of other countries as well who alone or mostly dominate the mine production of metal or industrial mineral. So not just China. But as you can see, there is not a single European Union country here, except Slovakia for zeolites and Spain for strontium. Right. So what's then more interesting, really, and more telling is this. Who dominates the refining and smelting of mineral raw materials? Right. That's there. So we go easily now into geopolitical matters, really, who are the players and who is there. Of course, for us in Europe, the local trouble comes from the east, directly from the east, and in there, the main things we should keep in mind are these two. They aim to rule over everything that has been ever ruled by Russia or Soviet Union. And because of the situation in Ukraine, since 2022, Russia has become really dependent on China. And the rest is, you can read these things afterwards. This will come available later on for you. China, what's on there? It's been a long run, long march, even longer than the long march of the Red Army before the Second World War in China to become the factory of the world, and with government subsidies in production and coal-powered energy competing out other producers. Right, and keeping for internal issues, it's for China. Chinese leaders know very well the history of their country. I think what they avoid the most is, or keep the most important still is to keep the internal stability of the country in there. Anyhow, all this means huge geopolitical risks. And effects by the big players on various ways in the governments of other countries. Of course, this is nothing new. This has always been the ways. Tools have been varied, but always the ways of imperialistic powers. Since the age of Rome, at least. So this is nothing, in the end, nothing specific that only China is doing. No ways. So the realpolitik, as the old German expression goes, it's always been there, never went away. we see details in here that's been there very recently and are ongoing. China is using the mineral and metal and all sorts of production as a tool in international politics. Now, if we look at let's leave the rare earths for a while. Let's look at the nickel. 2/3 of nickel is still used in stainless steel. The share of batteries is growing, yes, but it is stainless steel still. It is the biggest, where the biggest demand is. Right, but what's happening? What is new really, what's happened during past less than 10 years is the increased production in Indonesia. The nickel production from laterites with Chinese Chinese companies has increased so much, and now also battery grade nickel is produced from the laterite nickel deposits. So much so that Indonesia and China jointly also dominate the smelter and refinery production of nickel at a cost. If we look at what happens, what things is there, the direct cost goes of course into the environment of Indonesia, but also on the atmosphere. Right, so all production, all mining, all the energy that nickel mining and cobalt comes by a fair bit there as well. Indonesia is, I think, now the second in global cobalt production after DRC, is that carbon emissions are really high. And then also we see from the satellite data that the methane leaks from coal mining in Indonesia is much more than the government is reporting. Okay, we could compare this into sulfide nickel mining and making nickel matte and nickel sulfate from sulfide ores in countries where no coal-fired power plants are in use, practically using renewed energy. So it's so much less. Okay. More than 80% of nickel is recycled, but which is really a lot. Most of this goes into stainless steel production, gets back in there. And then because of the growing demand of nickel, recycling really covers about 25% of the current global demand. Something to think about. But if you don't mind, if you just want the cheapest gadgets, cars, whatever, cheapest stainless steel, of course, this does not matter to you. And this is thinking as well in certain capitals of the world. Getting back to rare earths, maybe we should call them conflict minerals now. And this is mainly because it's Myanmar or Burma, whatever name you want to use for that country, that almost half of the heavy rare earths comes not from China, but mining in northern Myanmar. And all that is exported directly to China. Well, and what's going on in Myanmar is civil war. So whatever either side is selling, exporting, is of course benefiting. That's military of that side, be that rebels or the government. No question there. And then ionic leach of the regolith is the way to extract the heavy rare earths in northern Myanmar. Yeah, and what's going on? Who is holding these deposits? It's when you look at international news, outright very difficult to know who is actually benefiting locally. Anyhow, it seems that everything's exported to China in any case. Anything else can become conflict minerals if you think that anything that Taliban government controls in Afghanistan and sells could be called conflict minerals. Again, China is playing there as well. But not just China alone. Neighboring country, Iran is looking them, and then Turkey. This is at least what we know of. Okay. JRC, which is the big science organization of the European Union, has looked, for example, on supply chains. And this is really interesting report from 2 years back on looking at the 15 key techs on 5 strategic sectors, on energy, electromobility, that means cars and things, and then industrial, digital, aerospace, and defense industries. A bit restricted thing, but this is what they looked at. These are the 15 key techs. You could think of only thing that I didn't guess ahead, really. I was wondering what the hell is this additive manufacturing? Well, it means 3D printing. Okay. What is not included here is essentially the infrastructure, housing, fertilizers, steels, and so on. Anyhow, the important message here is that the energy transition is a material transition. Who has the access? Tells who is controlling things. And we all know that the European Union share of production of raw materials is typically never higher than 7%, with just these exceptions of zeolites and strontium, potassium probably as well there. Developed areas like European Union tend to control more further on of the supply chain when we go towards finalized products. But this is not the case for batteries, solar panels, data storage servers, smartphones, tablets, laptops, and drones. And this is just an example of solar panels. China dominates the whole value chain, down from making polysilicon and also production of silicon metals, which is not shown in this plot, into finalized solar panels. You buy the cheapest solar panel and you can be sure that everything's produced assembled, made in China. Right. So, as I said in the beginning, there's enormous increase in demand for strategic and critical raw materials. And European Union is heavily dependent on third countries. And this is the same for United States as well. Means plenty of risks there. Then matter is, as I mentioned with strategic raw material definition, that there are quite a number of metals that really can't be replaced with something else, at least not without loss of uh, loss of production, loss of quality of the final product. And then as global demand increase similar to Europe elsewhere as well, and then there is sectorial competition for the same raw materials as well. So there is a competition for the same pool of raw materials. And if this pool of a raw material is not increasing, it means it will become more difficult to get the stuff, and also the cost of unit weight will increase. Simple as it is. Supply risk disruptions. In the end, this might mean even using the trade as a weapon. Modern warfare is like this. Supply chains risk assessment must be there. Well, I'm pretty sure it is there in the topic, in the agenda of almost all governments in the world, but how do they actually deal with these things is another question. There's many things that this JRC study recommends, and practically all of these things European Union has started to act, and elsewhere we see the same thing. Just look at the US, what's going on. Interesting thing here is that where we end up is that this means more investment, education, research, exploration, mining, manufacturing, all that. Who is paying the bill? Think about that. Right, just small example on what's going on. This is just a small example to keep in mind, not as something that is the only thing European geological surveys have done. But jointly, what things look outside of what the geological surveys have done in this critical raw materials issue is producing some nice reports and maps like this. Big problem here is that many countries still don't have in Europe comprehensive mineral resource databases. They are not simply not there, because for decades there was this thinking that we can buy from abroad whatever raw materials we need. Simply, this sort of thinking does not work anymore. Forest site matters. Yeah, this is another mining company plus consultancy did this work a couple of years ago. Also pointing out that there is not enough scrap not enough things to be recycled to meet the expected demands. Because the expected demand growth is so much more that the raw materials are still there in whatever products they may use to make. Of course, laptops, mobile phones recycle quickly, but this is not the case for infrastructure, for example. Take a power line as an example. Yeah, so this is what we are seeing throughout. And for example, beyond what is thought as a critical raw material, you could look at steel. What is the demand of steel per megawatt produced by various energy sources? We see that the wind power needs so much more steel than anything else, for example. Right. Another plot from this EAI latest report on critical and strategic raw materials, what's going on. The forecasted demand growth. This steps means stated policy scenarios. So what the governments have planned to do to move towards renewable energy production. So we see growth on these six raw materials. And what we see for recycling is just to look at this percentage scale here and on right. This is these percentages how much the recycling could cover of the demand. So we typically we are all the way in very low numbers for these same essential raw materials for renewable energy production and use. In this JRC report I already mentioned, there are plenty of things that looked at, including all these 15 strategic technologies. But what I want to point out from there are these general demand scenarios, high and low demand scenarios, and this is for Europe for 2030 and 2050. What we see as increase in demand. So we see the biggest increases in lithium, graphite, and cobalt, and also selected rare earths. Globally, the same thing. Here, the lithium looks like even more dominating. Right, as a last thing to make you really, what I said, the unpleasant reality is, and unpleasant feelings is coming from what political scientists every now and then might tell. But here, I have put this on just on raw materials. If we lose the knowledge of where we've got resources in ground or secondary resources included, this means eventually diminishing access to these raw materials wherever there might be, and troubles all the way in the supply chain, down that it might even affect the stability of the society. I know this is quite a tall tale and quite hard to roughly put, but this is what the political scientists have been telling when looking at the history of the human civilizations. As the systems become more complex and the degree of interdependence between the constituent parts grows, that is, for us, global trade networks, keeping the overall system stable becomes more difficult. So, maybe this is my final message here, that besides just doing geology, geophysics, geosciences, and investigating mineral resources and extraction of minerals and metals and making products, never ignore what's going on locally and globally in political affairs. No matter how unpleasant news you see in the media. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for Pasi. I really appreciate the background geopolitical insight in the mining industry. So thanks.